World War II stories are filled with tales of valor. Yet few are as extraordinary as Commander Richard Antrim, whose clever strategy in a Japanese prison camp saved countless lives. Courage does not always roar on the battlefield. It can also shine in the quiet defiance of captivity. Commander Richard Antrim watched his ship die from the relative safety of the oil-slicked waves. The USS Pope, a classic Clemson-class destroyer that had been his home for over 2 years, was breaking apart under relentless assault. 12 Japanese aircraft had found her after a 3-hour running battle against impossible odds. 4 heavy cruisers and 4 destroyers closed in like wolves on wounded prey. The Pope had fought magnificently. She had fired every torpedo, expended over 140 salvos from her 4-inch guns. But the end, when it came, was inevitable. Direct bomb hits had shattered her boiler, crippled her propulsion. The order to abandon ship had come just after noon. Now Richard Antrim floated among the wreckage and the 151 other survivors. He was 34 years old, executive officer of the Pope, a graduate of the Naval Academy class of 1931. He had been at sea when war broke out in the Pacific, had fought in desperate battles at Balikpapan and Batam Strait. Now he was swimming in enemy waters, wounded by shrapnel, watching his fellow sailors struggle against exhaustion. For 3 days and nights, Antrim led the survivors as they drifted on life rafts and wreckage, rationing what little water they had. On the 4th day, salvation arrived in the form of damnation. A Japanese destroyer spotted them and hauled them from the sea. The enemy who had hunted them so ruthlessly now became their captors. Hell had only just begun. The camp facility at Makassar held approximately 2,700 Allied prisoners. Americans, British, Dutch, and Australian. Richard Antrim quickly learned his new reality with the practiced eye of a naval officer trained to assess situations and develop solutions. The camp consisted of crude wooden buildings with thatched roofs that leaked in frequent tropical rains. Sanitation was primitive at best. Open latrines that bred disease, limited access to clean water. The food was barely sufficient to sustain life. Rice, thin vegetable soup, occasionally fish heads or scraps of meat. Men began to lose weight rapidly, their bodies consuming themselves as malnutrition set in. But it was not the physical deprivation that defined Makassar. It was the psychological warfare, the constant assertion of Japanese dominance. The guards operated under a military philosophy that viewed surrender as the ultimate dishonor. Prisoners could be beaten for looking at a guard incorrectly, for failing to bow deeply enough, for working too slowly. The beatings were not mere slaps or punches. They were methodical assaults with bamboo rods, rifle butts, lengths of thick rope. The incident that would define Richard Antrim's legacy began on an ordinary day in April. As ordinary as days could be in a Japanese prison camp. One of the American officers, a young man whose precise transgression would never be clearly determined, had attracted attention of a Japanese guard. Perhaps he had failed to bow quickly enough. Perhaps he had been caught with contraband. Perhaps the guard simply needed a victim for his rage. The guard began beating the officer with a length of thick rope, a hawser typically used on ships. Each blow landed with a sound like a gunshot, raising welts and splitting skin. The officer tried to protect himself. Other prisoners stopped what they were doing. They watched helplessly as one of their own was systematically brutalized. Richard Antrim made his decision in a heartbeat. He stepped forward. The simple act of moving toward the beating drew attention of not just the enraged guard, but of the entire Japanese contingent in the camp. Other guards rushed to the scene. The camp commander emerged from his quarters. Within minutes, the entire Japanese force had assembled. Antrim approached the guard, his hands raised in gesture of non-aggression. His body language carefully calibrated to be respectful without being servile. He attempted to communicate with the guard, to calm him, to shift his attention away from the beaten officer. The language barrier made this difficult. Antrim spoke no Japanese beyond a few words, and the guard's English was similarly limited. But Antrim persisted, using hand gestures, facial expressions, and tone of voice to convey his meaning. The beating stopped. The officer collapsed to the ground, barely conscious, blood streaming from wounds across his back and shoulders. The camp commander stepped forward. Through an interpreter, he announced that the prisoner would receive 50 lashes for his offense. The entire camp population was ordered to witness the punishment. Guards formed a circle around the scene. The tension was extraordinary. 2,700 Allied prisoners, many of them hardened combat veterans, stood watching. Richard Antrim assessed the situation with the clarity of a man who understood he was at a pivotal moment. The officer on the ground would not survive 50 lashes. His body had already been pushed beyond its limits. More beating would kill him, and his death would become a symbol of helplessness that would break the spirit of every prisoner. He stepped forward again. He indicated to the guards, through gesture and expression, that he would take the remainder of the punishment. The effect was electric. The Japanese guards stopped. They looked at each other, confused and uncertain. This was not behavior they had encountered before. Not from prisoners they viewed as cowardly and dishonorable for having surrendered. The camp commander stared at Antrim, trying to comprehend what was being offered. The crowd of Allied prisoners erupted in a roar of acclaim. The sound rolled across the camp like thunder. In that moment, Richard Antrim became more than an individual. He became a symbol of defiance, of dignity maintained in the face of degradation. The Japanese guards found themselves completely off balance. The camp commander conferred with his subordinates. They had prepared for many scenarios: resistance, escape attempts, sabotage. But not for this. The beating did not continue. The camp commander, whether moved by respect, confusion, or calculation, called off the punishment. The officer who had been beaten was carried away for whatever medical attention could be improvised. The incident changed everything. The treatment of prisoners at Makassar improved measurably in the days and weeks that followed. Living conditions, while still harsh, became marginally more bearable. Food rations increased slightly. Access to water improved. Richard Antrim had saved more than one man's life that day. He had preserved the dignity and fighting spirit of 2,700 prisoners. More than a year passed. Richard Antrim survived the daily grind of camp life. The hunger, the disease, the boredom punctuated by moments of terror. He had been promoted in absentia to commander, though the rank meant little in a place where all prisoners were equally powerless. Then came the order that would give him the opportunity to execute the most audacious trick of resistance during his entire captivity. The Allies were advancing across the Pacific, island by island, striking every Japanese camp they encountered. American B-24 Liberators and B-17. Flying fortresses now ranged across the Pacific, striking targets throughout the occupied territories. The problem was distinguishing between legitimate military targets and prisoner of war camps. Many prison camps were located near or within larger military complexes. The Japanese made no effort to clearly mark these camps. At Makassar, the Japanese decided to construct air raid shelters. They needed slit trenches to provide protection during bombing raids. The Japanese selected Richard Antrim to supervise a labor detail of prisoners for this task. It was a test. It was also an opportunity, one that Antrim recognized immediately and began to exploit with extraordinary cleverness. The Japanese guards presented Antrim with plans for the trench system. Layout was practical and efficient, designed to maximize coverage. He carefully studied the plans with apparent care. Then, with self-effacing humility he had learned to project, he began to suggest modifications. The ground here was softer and more suitable for digging. The orientation there would provide better drainage during the frequent rains. This spacing would be more efficient given the number of workers available. These changes would actually make the guards' shelter system more effective. His suggestions were delivered with such apparent sincerity, with such technical competence, that the Japanese guards accepted them. They approved the changes. They watched as Antrim marked out the modified trench pattern and set his labor detail to work. What they did not see, what they could not see from ground level, was what the pattern would look like from the air. He had cleverly redesigned the trench system so that the excavations would form a gigantic sign spelling out the letters US so that pilots could see it. The work proceeded over weeks. Prisoners dug the trenches under watchful eyes of Japanese guards, alert for any sign of sabotage. The labor was backbreaking. Digging through volcanic soil in tropical heat, carrying away baskets of dirt, shaping trenches to proper depth and width. Antrim supervised with meticulous attention to detail. He moved among his workers, ensuring each trench was dug exactly where he had marked it. To the guards, he appeared to be a model prisoner. Industrious and cooperative, ensuring that the Japanese got the shelter system they had ordered. But the workers knew. Word had spread through whispered conversations during meals, during brief moments when guards were distracted. The Americans digging the trenches understood that they were building a message visible from thousands of feet in the air. A message that would identify this location as a prisoner of war camp. A message that could save hundreds of lives if Allied bombers ever came this way. The risk was extraordinary. If the Japanese discovered what Antrim was doing, the consequences would be immediate and fatal. The standard punishment for sabotage was beheading. Antrim would be executed, probably after torture. Others might be killed as well. Collective punishment being a favorite Japanese tactic. But Antrim had calculated that the risk was worth taking. His psychological profile of his captors suggested they would not think to look from above. The idea that the pattern of trenches itself could be a form of communication was too subtle, too clever, beyond their framework of expected prisoner behavior. He was right. The work proceeded without incident. The trenches took shape, day by day, letter by letter. From ground level, they appeared to be exactly what they were supposed to be. A practical system of air raid shelters arranged for maximum efficiency. From above, they told a different story. The project was completed. The Japanese inspected the work and found it satisfactory. Antrim and his labor detail were returned to regular camp duties. The trenches remained, waiting to serve their purpose. The months stretched into years. Conditions at Makassar remained harsh, but not uniformly fatal. The key to survival was maintaining both physical health and mental equilibrium. Eating whatever food was provided, conserving energy. Antrim watched Mendy from disease, from malnutrition, from injuries that would have been easily treatable in any proper medical facility. He helped maintain discipline among the American prisoners, settling disputes, preventing conflicts that could draw Japanese attention. He counseled men who were struggling with depression or rage. He used his position as a senior officer to advocate for better conditions. He never forgot that he was still a naval officer, still bound by duty and honor, regardless of circumstance. The end came suddenly. Rumors had been circulating for weeks that something had changed in the war, that the Japanese were facing some new kind of crisis. The guards seemed more nervous, more unpredictable. Then came the announcement that Japan had surrendered, that the war was over, that Allied forces would be arriving to liberate the camps. The prisoners at Makassar could hardly believe it. 3.5 years of captivity, 3.5 years of wondering if they would survive to see freedom, had ended in an instant with words broadcast over a radio. Some men wept. Others cheered. Many simply sat in stunned silence, unable to process that their ordeal was truly over. Allied recovery teams began arriving in September 1945. Medical personnel assessed the prisoners' conditions. The malnutrition, the tropical diseases, the lingering effects of beatings and injuries. Supply planes dropped food, medicine, clothing, everything the prisoners had been denied for so long. Ships arrived to transport them home. Richard Antrim boarded one of those ships, along with the other survivors of the Pope and thousands of other prisoners. He was listed as officially alive for the first time since March 1942, when he had been declared missing after his ship's sinking. He weighed far less than he had when captured. He carried scars, both visible and invisible. But he had survived. Many prisoners struggled with what would later be called post-traumatic stress disorder. Anger and nightmares were common. Antrim dealt with his own demons quietly. He had spent 3.5 years maintaining a facade of control and confidence. That discipline did not immediately dissolve upon liberation. He wrote reports about his experiences. After rehabilitation, leave and a refresher course at the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C., Richard Antrim returned to duty. He resumed flight training at Lakehurst and attended the Naval War College. He was preparing to continue his career. The Navy Cross came first. Awarded for his actions as executive officer of the Pope during the desperate battle in the Java Sea. The citation praised his heroism in combat against overwhelming enemy forces. his role in damaging Japanese ships, his leadership in helping sailors abandon ship. Then came the Bronze Star, for his ingenious construction of the U.S. marker in the trench system at Makassar. But the most significant recognition came when President Harry S. Truman presented Commander Richard Antrim with the Medal of Honor. The Medal of Honor citation detailed the incident from April 1942, when Antrim had intervened to save a fellow officer. It described his bold action in approaching a frenzied guard, his attempts to calm the situation and seek a peaceful resolution. It recounted how Antrim had gallantly stepped forward to take the remainder of the punishment when the other officer had been beaten unconscious. How his action had thrown the Japanese guards completely off balance. How it had elicited a roar of acclaim from the assembled prisoners. And how it had brought about improved conditions for all prisoners at the camp. That courage could be shown not just in attacking the enemy, but in protecting one's fellow prisoners. That honor could be maintained even in the most degrading circumstances. He retired in 1954 due to health problems stemming from his years of captivity. The tropical diseases, the malnutrition, the injury sustained during beatings had taken a long-term toll on his body. After retirement, he settled in Mountain Home, Arkansas, a quiet town that became his sanctuary. He remained active in veterans affairs and frequently spoke at patriotic events. In a 1967 Veterans Day speech at the Arkansas State Capitol, he urged his fellow veterans to apply the same dedication they had shown in wartime. He spoke of a golden era of America that could be achieved if Americans maintained the same commitment to service and sacrifice. He died on March 7, 1969, at the age of 61, and was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. He served his country for over 2 decades. He fought in combat, survived captivity, and continued to serve after liberation. He was by any measure a man of exceptional courage and principle. That is the legacy of Rear Admiral Richard Antrim, United States Navy, Medal of Honor recipient. Thank you for watching and spending these moments with us. If you'd like to hear more remarkable World War II stories, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next episode.